Three young thugs target a disabled black veteran at the gym, shoving the Army hero and mocking his injured leg while other members watch in fear. The bullies grow bolder, knocking over his water bottle and blocking his equipment, laughing as they humiliate the quiet man who served his country. But the graying stranger hitting the heavy bag in the corner isn't just another gym member. This is Mike Tyson himself. The punks have no idea they just picked a fight in front of the most feared heavyweight champion in boxing history, a man who once terrorized the ring with devastating knockouts. While the thugs continue their harassment, Iron Mike steps away from the bag, his voice cutting through the gym like a blade. The lead bully recognizes that distinctive Brooklyn accent and those cold, predator eyes, realizing he's face-to-face with a living legend who's spent decades destroying opponents with his bare hands. The gym falls silent as the former champion approaches, his mere presence turning the cocky bullies into trembling cowards. What happens when you terrorize a veteran in front of the baddest man on the planet? Will these punks survive learning why some legends never fade? What happened next would haunt the bullies for the rest of their pathetic lives. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The parking lot of Riverside Community Gym was empty except for a few early birds when Mike pulled his Honda Accord into a space near the back. 6 in the morning on a Tuesday meant most of Queens was still asleep, which suited him just fine. He sat for a moment, adjusting his gray hoodie and checking that his beard covered enough of his face. Anonymity was a gift he'd learned to treasure. The gym smelled like disinfectant and old rubber mats. A handful of dedicated members were already into their routines, a construction worker pushing iron with steady determination, an elderly Asian woman moving through careful stretches, a few joggers claiming the treadmills. Mike nodded to nobody in particular and approached the front desk. "Morning," he said to the clerk, a thin guy with nervous eyes who barely looked up from his magazine. $10 for a day pass." Mike laid a crumpled bill on the counter and signed the visitor log in careful handwriting. M. Kirkpatrick. His birth name felt right for this new routine. Nobody had called him Malik in decades, but it connected him to something simpler, something before the fame and the chaos and the long climb back to peace. The gym's layout was basic but functional. Cardio equipment dominated the front windows, free weights filled the middle section, and the serious training happened in back, where heavy bags hung from reinforced ceiling mounts. Mike headed for the corner, as far from the entrance as possible. He unwrapped his hand wraps slowly, the ritual as familiar as breathing. Loop around the thumb, across the knuckles, between each finger. His hands weren't young anymore. 57 years of life and 30 years of professional violence had left their marks, but they still knew their business. The heavy bag accepted his first tentative jabs with a solid thump. Left, right, left hook. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Just an older man trying to stay in shape. But even holding back, even moving with careful control, the bag responded with authority. The chain creaked with each impact. Metal links singing a song he'd heard in 1,000 gyms across 3 decades. Around him, the morning regulars went about their business. The construction worker, Bobby, from the name on his shirt, moved between exercises with blue-collar efficiency. The elderly woman finished her stretches and headed for the water aerobics pool in the back room. A young teacher type gathered her things and checked her phone for the time. Mike found his rhythm. Not the explosive combinations that had made him famous, but something steadier, more meditative. Each punch sent vibrations up his arms, through his shoulders, into the core of him where muscle memory lived. This was meditation for a man who'd never learned to sit still. Therapy for someone who'd always worked out his problems with his fists. The front door chimed as new arrivals entered. Mike glanced over without breaking his rhythm and felt his jaw tighten slightly. 3 young men in expensive workout gear, moving with the kind of swagger that came from never facing real consequences. They surveyed the gym like wolves checking out a hen house. Mike's next left hook landed a little harder than he'd intended. The bag swung wider, chain rattling. He caught it on the return, steadying the rhythm, but something had changed in the atmosphere. The construction worker glanced toward the newcomers, then quickly returned to his weights. The elderly woman quickened her pace toward the exit. The 3 young predators were looking for something or someone. "Check out this place," Brad Kowalski said, running a hand through his perfectly styled blonde hair. At 25, he carried himself like he owned every room he entered. His Alpha Elite tank top stretched tight across his gym-enhanced chest, and his blue eyes swept the workout space with calculating interest. Kyle Murphy, tall and rangy with red hair, flexed in front of the mirror near the entrance. Look at all these senior citizens. It's like a nursing home with barbells. Derek Castellano cracked his knuckles and grinned. The stockiest of the three, he had the thick neck and broad shoulders of someone who'd done construction work before discovering easier ways to make money. Old people need to learn their place. They moved through the gym as a pack, their voices carrying over the quiet sounds of morning exercise. The construction worker kept his eyes on his bench press, but his shoulders tensed. The teacher-looking woman gathered her things and headed for the exit, her workout cut short by the toxic atmosphere that followed them like a cloud. Pete Santangelo, the gym owner, watched nervously from behind the front desk. At 55, he'd been a decent welterweight in his day, but those days felt like ancient history. His polo shirt was already damp with nervous sweat, and his thinning hair was slicked back with the kind of anxiety that came from knowing trouble. When he saw it, "There," Brad said, nodding toward the back corner. "Perfect." Marcus Williams sat at the leg press machine, adjusting the weight pins with the careful attention of someone who understood his body's limitations. At 45, he carried himself with quiet dignity despite the slight limp that marked his left leg. His faded army t-shirt was clean and pressed, and his movements were deliberate and practiced. The three young men approached like sharks, scenting blood in the water. They spread out in a loose semicircle around Marcus's workout station, their body language predatory and territorial. Marcus glanced up from his setup, offering a polite nod that went unreturned. "Excuse me," Brad said, his voice carrying false politeness that fooled nobody. "I think you might be using that machine wrong." Marcus looked up with the patient expression of a high school history teacher who'd dealt with difficult students for 15 years. "I'm sorry, the leg press," Kyle added, gesturing at the machine with theatrical concern. "This equipment's really for serious athletes. Maybe you'd be more comfortable with something lighter." "I appreciate the concern," Marcus replied evenly, his voice carrying the controlled calm of military training. "But I'm using it correctly for my physical therapy. My doctor specifically recommended this exercise." Derek stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Marcus's position. "Physical therapy? What happened?" "Forget how to walk straight." The three shared a laugh that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with establishing dominance. Marcus continued his setup, checking the weight pins twice before settling into position. Years of army discipline had taught him when to engage and when to endure. This was clearly a time for endurance. From the heavy bag station in the back corner came the steady rhythm of leather on canvas. But the impacts were coming harder now, more frequent. The graying man in the hoodie continued his workout, but his movements had taken on a different quality, more focused, more intense. "You sure you can handle that weight?" Brad asked, leaning against the machine's frame like he belonged there. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." Again, Marcus began his first set, pushing the weight with controlled power. His injured leg worked harder than the other. Compensation patterns developed over years of rehabilitation, but he managed 8 clean repetitions before setting the weight down gently. "Impressive," Kyle said with mock admiration, pulling out his phone to record. For a cripple, the word hung in the air like poison gas. Around the gym, conversations stopped. Other members found sudden interest in their own workouts, eyes averted, shoulders hunched. Pete Santangelo ducked behind his magazine, pretending not to hear. The heavy bag in the corner shuddered under an especially hard combination, the chain rattling like a warning bell that nobody seemed to notice. "You know what I like about this place?" Brad continued, settling into his harassment like it was a comfortable chair. "It's got character, real diversity. Old guys trying to relive their glory days, broken soldiers pretending they're still tough." He gestured around the gym with proprietary satisfaction. Marcus finished his second set and reached for his water bottle, his movements still controlled, but his jaw slightly tighter than before. "I've been coming here for 3 months. Never had any problems." 3 months. Kyle's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. "That's weird. We've been regulars here way longer than that." Usually Pete's pretty careful about his membership standards. His phone was still recording, capturing everything for later entertainment. Derek positioned himself to block Marcus's view of the nearest exit, a move that spoke to practiced intimidation tactics. The gym's layout suddenly felt smaller, more confined, with the three young men controlling the space around the leg press machine. Maybe there's been some kind of mistake, Brad said, his voice dripping with false concern. Pete. Hey, Pete. From behind the front desk, Pete Santangelo's face went pale. He'd seen Brad's father's business card, some hotshot Manhattan lawyer who'd made pointed comments about liability insurance and frivolous lawsuits. The last thing Pete could afford was legal trouble, not with the gym barely breaking even and his daughter's college tuition due next month. Yeah, Pete called back weakly, not moving from his defensive position behind the counter. This guy says he's been a member for 3 months. You sure your screening process is up to standard? Pete's face reddened with embarrassment, but he said nothing. His silence hung in the air like a betrayal, and Marcus felt it like a physical blow. When he'd first joined, Pete had thanked him for his service, had shown him around personally, had called him a credit to the community. Apparently, gratitude had an expiration date. See, Kyle gestured toward Pete's non-response with satisfaction. Even the owner knows something's not right here. Marcus began his third set, each repetition now carrying the weight of accumulated humiliation. 8 reps, 9, 10. His injured leg burned with the effort, but he pushed through like he'd been taught in physical therapy, like he'd learned in the army when quitting meant letting your brothers down. Around the gym, the morning regulars were making their escape. Bobby Rodriguez finished his bench press quickly and headed for the locker room without making eye contact. An elderly Korean War veteran named Frank Kowalski gathered his towel and water bottle with obvious discomfort. A young mother who'd been using the elliptical machine stopped mid-workout and headed for the exit. Oops. Derek's elbow caught Marcus's water bottle as he reached for it between sets, sending it flying across the rubber floor to splash against the wall 20 feet away. Clumsy me. The casual destruction of his simple routine sparked something deep in Marcus's memory. Baghdad, 1991. A roadside checkpoint where local bullies had knocked over an old man's vegetable cart, scattering his livelihood in the dust while laughing at his helpless tears. Marcus had been a young soldier then, full of righteous anger and clear purpose. He'd stepped forward that day, helped the old man gather his scattered produce, stood between him and his tormentors until they slunk away into the crowd. That's what soldiers did. They protected people who couldn't protect themselves. But that was 30 years and one shattered leg ago. Now he was the old man with the scattered belongings, and there was no young soldier coming to his rescue. You gonna clean that up? Brad asked, nodding toward the spreading puddle. Someone could slip and get hurt. We wouldn't want any accidents. From the heavy bag station came a sound like thunder, leather striking canvas with professional precision. Again and again, building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the walls. But the three young predators were too focused on their prey to notice the storm building behind them. Marcus started to rise from the leg press, his routine completely destroyed. His sanctuary turned into a battlefield where he was losing without even being allowed to fight. The heavy bag fell silent. Hey, the single word cut through the gym's tension like a knife through silk. Every conversation stopped. Every machine went quiet. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause as heads turned toward the back corner where a heavy-set man in a gray hoodie was walking forward with deliberate purpose. That's enough. His voice carried the unmistakable accent of Brooklyn streets. But underneath ran something deeper, an authority that came from places where words carried the weight of life and death. The three young men turned as one, their harassment routine interrupted by unwelcome interference. Excuse me. Brad's voice still carried its usual arrogance, but uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. The approaching man was older, graying, nothing special to look at. But something about the way he moved, the way his hands hung loose and ready at his sides, set off every survival instinct Brad's privileged life had never required him to develop. You heard me. The man stepped into their circle like he had every right to be there, his presence somehow filling the space between the bullies and their victim. Up close, his face was familiar in some nagging way, like a half-remembered dream, or a song you couldn't quite place. Kyle was the first to recognize him. His phone, still recording, nearly slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. Holy shit, he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're Mike Tyson. The name hit the gym like an electric shock. Bobby Rodriguez, halfway to the locker room, froze in his tracks. Pete Santangelo's magazine hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Even the hum of the ventilation system seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Mike looked at Kyle with mild interest, the way a teacher might acknowledge a correct but obvious answer. Smart kid. Then his attention returned to Brad, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Now apologize to this man. Apologize. Brad's voice cracked slightly. He'd grown up hearing stories about Iron Mike, watching grainy footage of devastating knockouts on YouTube, seeing grown men reduced to unconscious heaps in seconds flat. But that was ancient history, wasn't it? This was just some old guy trying to relive his glory days. Listen, old man, old man. Mike's smile held no warmth whatsoever. That's funny. You know what I was doing when I was your age? Putting people to sleep in front of millions of fans. What do? Pick on disabled veterans. Derek, the stockiest of the three, tried to salvage some dignity for the group. Look, this isn't your business. Wrong. Mike's voice carried absolute certainty, the kind that came from 30 years of facing down opponents who were bigger, younger, and hungrier. A veteran getting disrespected? That's everybody's business. Now you can apologize like gentlemen, or I can help you understand why that's your best option. He didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice, didn't even clench his fists. But something in his tone, in the way he shifted his weight slightly forward onto the balls of his feet, made it crystal clear that violence wasn't just possible, it was inevitable if they chose poorly. Brad's Jim 10 couldn't hide how pale his face had gone. This close to Mike, he could see the thickness of his neck, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands looked deceptively soft until you noticed the scarred knuckles and the surgical precision with which they moved. This wasn't some faded celebrity playing tough guy. This was a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of controlled violence. Brad's voice came out as a squeak. He cleared his throat and tried again. I'm sorry. Not to me. Mike nodded toward Marcus, who was watching the exchange with amazement bordering on disbelief. To him. He served his country. Show some respect. Brad forced himself to meet Marcus's eyes. His usual swagger completely evaporated. I'm sorry, sir. We were way out of line. Kyle and Derek followed suit, their apologies stammered and shaky but genuine in their obvious fear of consequences. Mike watched them carefully, making sure each word was directed toward Marcus with appropriate deference. Good, Mike said when they were finished. Now I think you boys might be more comfortable training somewhere else. Nothing personal. Just seems like this environment might not be the best fit for your personalities. They couldn't leave fast. Enough. Brad nearly tripped over his own feet in his hurry to reach the exit. Kyle dropped his phone twice trying to pocket it. Derek kept glancing back over his shoulder as if he expected Mike to change his mind about letting them go peacefully. As the door swung shut behind them, the gym erupted in spontaneous applause. Bobby Rodriguez whistled his appreciation. Pete finally emerged from behind his desk, his face flushed with embarrassment and gratitude. Mike ignored the attention and turned to Marcus, offering his hand. You okay? Marcus stood slowly, accepting the handshake with a grip that spoke to his own military training. More than okay. Thank you. Nothing to thank me for, Mike replied, but his small smile suggested otherwise. Name's Mike. Marcus Williams. As they shook hands, neither man noticed Brad's parting words, thrown over his shoulder as the door closed. This isn't over, old man. But in that moment, with justice served and dignity restored, everything felt exactly as it should be. The applause died down slowly, but the energy in the gym remained electric. Members who had been working out in tense silence suddenly felt free to move around, to make eye contact, to reclaim their space. Bobby Rodriguez approached with a broad grin, his hand extended. Man, that was something else, he said, pumping Mike's hand enthusiastically. Those punks have been making everyone miserable for weeks. Pete Santangelo finally emerged fully from behind his desk, his face red with embarrassment. Mr. Tyson, I should have done something sooner. I'm sorry. He turned to Marcus with genuine remorse. I'm sorry to you too, Marcus. That was inexcusable. Mike held up a hand, cutting off the apologies. What's done is done. Question is, what happens next? His eyes found Pete's and held them. This is your place. You set the tone. Pete straightened his shoulders, some of his old boxing confidence returning. You're right. Absolutely right. Those guys aren't welcome here anymore. Neither is anyone else who thinks they can treat people like that. Good man, Mike said simply, then turned his attention back to Marcus. You sure you're okay? That was a pretty good shove. Marcus rotated his shoulder experimentally, testing for injury. I've had worse. A lot worse. He paused, studying Mike's face with the careful attention of someone used to reading people. I have to ask, what brings Mike Tyson to a neighborhood gym in Queens at 6 in the morning? Mike's smile was self-deprecating. Same thing that brings everyone else, I guess. Trying to stay healthy. Trying to find some peace. He glanced around. The gym, which was slowly returning to its normal rhythm. Though I have to admit, this morning was more excitement than I usually bargain for. Well, I'm grateful for the excitement, Marcus said. Those three have been escalating their behavior. Every day, I was starting to think I'd have to find somewhere else to work out. That would have been their victory, Mike observed. Sometimes the only way to deal with bullies is to show them there are consequences for their actions. Marcus bent to retrieve his scattered belongings, moving carefully to protect his injured leg. You know, in all my years, I've never seen anyone back down that fast just from someone's reputation. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. Fear's a powerful thing, Mike said, helping gather the spilled contents of Marcus's gym bag. Sometimes it protects people, sometimes it hurts them. Those boys learned something today about picking the wrong fights. Speaking of fights, Marcus said, zipping up his bag, I caught some of your workout before the excitement started. You still look like you could go a few rounds. Mike chuckled, flexing his wrapped hands experimentally. Don't let the gray beard fool you. The engine still runs, even if it needs a little more warm-up time these days. He paused, considering. You know, I was thinking of making this a regular stop. Pete runs a good place here, and the morning crowd seems like decent people. The morning crowd is the best, Marcus agreed. Mrs. Chin's been doing water aerobics here for 10 years. Bobby's training for his department's fitness test. Frank Kowalski fought in Korea. He's got stories that'll keep you up at night. He shouldered his bag and extended his hand again. I hope you do decide to stick around. Place could use someone who's not afraid to stand up when it matters. They shook hands again, and Mike felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging somewhere, of having a purpose beyond his own maintenance and survival. Same time tomorrow? Mike asked. Wouldn't miss it, Marcus replied. And Mike? Thanks again, not just for stepping in, but for reminding me that there are still good people in the world. As Marcus headed for the exit, Mike returned to his heavy bag. But the rhythm felt different now, less solitary, more connected to something larger than himself. The gym's small coffee area consisted of 2 plastic tables, a vending machine, and a water cooler that had seen better days. Mike and Marcus settled into the chairs, both men still coming down from the adrenaline of the confrontation. Around them, the normal morning routine was slowly reasserting itself, but with a lighter atmosphere than before. So, Mike said, opening a bottle of water, Gulf War? Marcus nodded, unsurprised that Mike had picked up on the military bearing. 1st Infantry Division. We were part of the ground offensive in '91. He gestured toward his left leg with matter-of-fact acceptance. ID got our convoy on the way back from a patrol. Lost 2 good friends that day, and I lost most of my left calf muscle. I'm sorry, Mike said simply, for your friends and for what you went through. 24 years of physical therapy, Marcus continued. The leg's as good as it's going to get, but the VA docs say regular exercise helps with the phantom pain and keeps the PTSD manageable. This place has been perfect for that, until recently. Mike leaned forward slightly. Those 3 been causing problems for a while. About 6 weeks now, Marcus said, his jaw tightening with frustration. Started small. Comments, looks, taking equipment I was using. But they've been getting bolder. Mrs. Chun told me they accidentally bumped into her during her water aerobics class last week, almost knocked her down. Bobby said they followed his 16-year-old son into the locker room and made some comments that had the kid too scared to come back. And Pete. Marcus's expression darkened. Pete's a good man, but he's scared. Apparently Brad's father is some hotshot lawyer who made threats about lawsuits and liability. Pete can't afford legal trouble. This place is barely breaking even as it is. Mike absorbed this information, his mind automatically cataloging the pattern. They're not just random bullies. They're systematic about it. That's what worries me, Marcus said. It's like they're deliberately trying to drive certain people away. The elderly, minorities, anyone they see as vulnerable. They've already succeeded with at least half a dozen members, including kids. Bobby's son, like I mentioned. There was also a teenage girl who was training for her high school wrestling team. They made comments about her body that were so inappropriate her father pulled her membership and threatened to call the police. Mike's hands slowly clenched into fists. The casual cruelty, the systematic targeting of the vulnerable, it reminded him of predators he'd encountered in boxing gyms when he was young and powerless. The difference was he wasn't powerless anymore. What about the other members? Mike asked. Anyone else willing to stand up to them? Marcus shook his head. Most people here are just trying to get their workout done and get on with their day. Bobby's a good guy, but he's got a family to think about. Frank Kowalski's 73 and walks with a cane. Mrs. Chun weighs maybe 90 pounds, soaking wet. He paused. That's what made what you did so important. You showed everyone that these guys can be face down. Question is, will they stay face down? Mike mused. Bullies don't usually give up after one embarrassment. They either escalate or find softer targets. That's what I'm afraid of, Marcus admitted. I can handle myself, even with the leg. But Mrs. Chun? Frank? The next kid who tries to join. He shook his head. They don't deserve to live in fear because three punks think this is their personal playground. Mike studied Marcus's face, the quiet dignity, the genuine concern for others, the military bearing that hadn't been diminished by injury or time. This was a man who understood duty, who put others before himself, who represented everything those three bullies were trying to destroy. You know, Mike said slowly, I've been looking for a regular gym. Somewhere close to home, decent equipment, good people. He met Marcus's eyes. Think Pete would be interested in a monthly membership? Marcus's smile was answer enough. I think. Pete would be thrilled. And I think Mrs. Chun would sleep a lot better knowing you're around. As they gathered their things to leave, Mike felt something shifting inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. These weren't paying customers or business associates or people who wanted something from him. These were just decent people trying to live their lives without being terrorized by predators. Maybe it was time to stop hiding in corners. Mike's Queens apartment was modest by the standards of someone who'd once commanded millions per fight. But it suited him perfectly. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, family photos on the walls, and boxing memorabilia kept to a tasteful minimum. The evening light slanted through the windows as he prepared a simple dinner and tried to process the morning's events. He'd been retired from active competition for years, but walking away from those 3 bullies had felt more satisfying than any victory in the ring. There was something pure about it. No cameras, no purse money, no politics. Just right and wrong, and the ability to tip the scales in favor of justice. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed his daughter Milan's number. Hey, sweetheart, he answered, settling into his favorite chair. Dad, you sound different tonight. Good different. What's going on? Mike smiled. His daughter had always been able to read his moods, even over the phone. Had an interesting morning at the gym. Met a good man. Helped him out with a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that requires someone to remind some young punks that actions have consequences, Mike said carefully. He'd learned to edit his stories for his children. They worried enough about him without hearing all the details. Dad, Milan's voice carried gentle warning. Please tell me you didn't get into a fight. No fighting required. Sometimes reputation is enough. He paused, remembering the look of terror on Brad's face when recognition dawned. Though I have to admit, it felt good to use it for something worthwhile. Just be careful, okay? I know you can still take care of yourself, but you're not 25 anymore. After ending the call, Mike found himself thinking about Cuz D'Amato, his old trainer and father figure. Cuz had always preached that boxing was about more than winning fights. It was about discipline, respect, and using strength to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The hero and the coward both feel the same thing, Cuz used to say. But the hero uses his fear, projects it onto his opponent, while the coward runs. Mike pulled out his laptop and did some research on Marcus Williams. What he found reinforced his positive impression. Articles about Marcus's volunteer work at the VA hospital, his coaching of the high school wrestling team, his 15 years of teaching history at Jamaica High School. This was a man who'd served his country, then come home and continued serving his community. He deserved better than being terrorized by 3 overgrown children with too much money and too little character. The more Mike thought about it, the more convinced he became that this morning's confrontation was just the beginning. Bullies like Brad Kowalski didn't back down permanently after one humiliation. They regrouped, they escalated, they found ways to get revenge when they thought no one was watching. But what if someone was watching? What if Mike made Riverside Community Gym his regular training spot? What if he became a fixture there, a presence that reminded everyone, including potential troublemakers, that some lines shouldn't be crossed? Mike walked to his bedroom and pulled out an old photo from his nightstand drawer. It showed him with Cuz, both of them grinning after a particularly good training session. Cuz looked ancient in the photo, but his eyes were bright with pride and purpose. "You always said I had more potential than just fighting," Mike said to the photo. "Maybe it's time I figured out what that means." He picked up his phone and dialed the gym's number. Pete answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. "Riverside Community Gym." "Pete, it's Mike Tyson. I was wondering about monthly membership rates." The relief in Pete's voice was audible. "Mr. Tyson, for you? No charge. After what you did this morning, membership's on the house for as long as you want it." "I appreciate that, but I pay my way," Mike said firmly. "What I want to know is whether you'd be comfortable having me around on a regular basis." "Early mornings, mostly. I like the quiet, and I like the people." "Comfortable." Pete laughed, the first genuine laughter Mike had heard from him. "Mr. Tyson, you just solved the biggest problem I've had in months. You stick around, and I guarantee this place will be everything it's supposed to be, a safe space where good people can work out in peace." As Mike hung up the phone, he felt more energized than he had in months. For the first time in years, he had a clear purpose beyond maintaining his own health and sanity. He was going to help protect something worth protecting. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Mike arrived at Riverside Community Gym Wednesday morning with the energy of a man who'd rediscovered his purpose. He'd slept better than he had in months, his dreams filled not with the old nightmares of his troubled past, but with images of community, belonging, and the simple satisfaction of standing up for what was right. The morning crowd was all ready. Then when he walked in at 6 sharp, Bobby Rodriguez waved from the bench press, calling out a cheerful "Morning, champ." Mrs. Chun smiled and nodded from her stretching area. Even Pete seemed more confident behind the front desk, his shoulders squared and his manner more assertive, but something was wrong. Marcus's usual spot at the leg press machine was empty, and his absence felt like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. Mike checked his watch. 7 o'clock came and went with no sign of Marcus. By 8, Mike's mild concern had shifted into genuine worry. Marcus had been punctual as a Swiss watch every morning for 3 months, according to Pete. Missing a day without notice wasn't like him. "Pete," Mike called out, approaching the front desk. "You heard from Marcus this morning?" Pete's face clouded over. "No, and that's what's weird. He never misses without calling first." He fumbled with some paperwork, avoiding eye contact. "Actually, I was going to mention something to you." Before Pete could continue, Mike's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered it cautiously. "Mr. Tyson? This is Detective Janet Morales with the NYPD. I'm calling about Marcus Williams." Mike's blood went cold. "What about him?" "You're listed as his emergency contact for gym-related incidents. Marcus was found unconscious in the parking lot here around 11 last night. He's at Jamaica Hospital with a severe concussion, broken ribs, and internal bleeding." The gym around Mike seemed to fade away, replaced by a rushing sound in his ears. "How bad?" "He's stable, but it was a professional beating. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Detective Morales's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I understand you had an incident with some local troublemakers yesterday morning." "I'll be right there," Mike said, already heading for the exit. "Mr. Tyson, wait," Pete called after him. "There's something else you should know." Mike turned back, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Pete was pale and sweating, wringing his hands like a man about to confess a mortal sin. "The security cameras," Pete said quietly. "They malfunctioned last night, between 10:30 and 11:30. The system was down for routine maintenance. His voice was hollow with guilt. I got a call around 9 last night. Anonymous tip that there might be some vandalism attempt, that I should shut down the cameras for an hour to avoid filming anything that might cause legal complications. And you did it, Mike said, his voice deadly quiet. I was scared, Pete whispered. After yesterday, after you stood up to those guys, I thought maybe things would settle down. But then the call came, and the voice was threatening. Said things could get worse for me, for my family, if I didn't cooperate. Mike felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates grinding against each other before an earthquake. This wasn't random violence. This wasn't even simple revenge. This was a message, a statement, a declaration of war against anyone who dared to stand up for what was right. Mr. Tyson, Pete continued desperately, maybe you should consider training somewhere else. I can't guarantee your safety here, and I can't afford. No. Mike's voice cut through Pete's rambling like a blade. I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I'm just getting started. He pulled out his phone and called Detective Morales back. Detective, this is Mike Tyson again. I want to know everything about last night's attack, and I want to know who's behind it. Mr. Tyson, I understand you're upset, but this is a police matter. This became my matter the moment they put my friend in the hospital, Mike interrupted. I'll be at Jamaica Hospital in 20 minutes. Meet me there. As Mike headed for his car, his mind was already working through the implications. This wasn't about gym bullies anymore. This was about something bigger, more organized, more dangerous. Someone had turned Marcus's beating into a carefully orchestrated operation, complete with disabled security cameras and anonymous threats that they'd made two critical mistakes. First, they'd hurt an innocent man who'd done nothing but stand up for himself. Second, they'd done it to send a message to Mike Tyson. Message received. Now it was time to send one back. Jamaica Hospital's ICU smelled like disinfectant and quiet desperation. Mike followed the sterile corridors to room 314, where Marcus Williams lay connected to machines that beeped softly in the afternoon silence. His head was wrapped in bandages, his face swollen and discolored, but his eyes were alert when Mike entered. You look like hell, Mike said gently, pulling up a chair beside the bed. Marcus tried to smile, wincing as the movement pulled at his split lip. Feel worse than I look, and that's saying something. His voice was thick and careful, each word requiring effort. Thanks for coming. Wouldn't be anywhere else. Mike studied the extent of Marcus's injuries. Professional work, systematic and thorough. You remember what happened? Some of it. Marcus's eyes darkened with memory. I was leaving around 10:30, later than usual. Had some papers to grade. At home, 3 guys jumped me in the parking lot. Not the same 3 from yesterday, but definitely working together. You get a good look at them? Good enough. Marcus shifted carefully, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate his ribs. But Mike, there's something I didn't tell you yesterday. Something I should have mentioned when those boys first started harassing me. Mike leaned forward, sensing the weight of what was coming. About 2 weeks ago, Brad approached me after my workout. Not with the others, just him, trying to be friendly. Said he'd been watching me train, was impressed with my dedication despite my injury. Marcus paused, gathering strength. Then he made me an offer. What kind of offer? Said he knew people who organized private boxing matches. Wealthy clients who appreciated seeing real fighters with real stories settle disputes in the ring. Good money, he said. 5,000 for one fight. Winner takes 10. Mike's jaw tightened. And you said no. Of course I said no. I'm a high school teacher, not a professional fighter. Plus, the whole thing sounded shady as hell. Marcus touched his bandaged head gingerly. But then he said something that stuck with me. He said they specialized in matching people who had personal grievances, veterans against guys who'd disrespected them, elderly people against younger punks who'd humiliated them. Made it sound like justice. Justice with a price tag. Exactly. I told him I wasn't interested, and that's when the harassment started getting worse. Yesterday, when you stepped in, I thought maybe they'd move on to easier targets. Marcus met Mike's eyes with grim understanding. I was wrong. The door opened and Detective Janet Morales entered, a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent dark eyes and the bearing of someone used to command. She nodded to Mike and approached Marcus's bedside with professional concern. How are you feeling, Primo? She asked Marcus, using the Spanish term for cousin. Like I got hit by a truck, Marcus replied. But alive, thanks to good doctors and better luck. Janet turned to Mike, her expression serious. Mr. Tyson, I've been investigating a series of similar attacks across Queens. At least 12 people have been approached with fight offers after being harassed at various locations, gyms, community centers, even grocery stores. 3 actually agreed to fight and ended up hospitalized. What kind of injuries? Mike asked, though he suspected he already knew. Severe beatings disguised as fair fights. These people thought they were settling personal disputes, but they were actually being fed to professional fighters for the entertainment of wealthy spectators. Janet's voice carried barely controlled anger. The whole thing's organized, well-funded, and connected. Mike absorbed this information, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. Connected how? Money laundering, illegal gambling, maybe worse. We think someone's using these fights to test a business model, turn ordinary people's pain and humiliation into profitable entertainment for rich sociopaths. Marcus struggled to sit up straighter, his face pale with effort. Mike, you need to stay away from this. These people are dangerous, and they're organized. They have money and connections that go way beyond 3 gym bullies. Marcus is right, Janet added. We're building a case, but it's going to take time. Federal authorities are interested because it crosses state lines. Best thing you can do is lay low and let us handle it legally. Mike stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. Somewhere out there, predators were hunting for vulnerable people to feed into their machine of violence and profit. They'd put a good man in the hospital to send him a message about staying in his lane. Detective, Mike said without turning around, how long will your legal case take? Months, maybe longer. These people know how to cover their tracks. And how many more victims while you're building your case? Janet's silence was answer enough. Mike turned back to face them both, his decision made. I need the contact information for an old friend. Lou Benedetto. He still trains fighters out of Gleason's gym in Brooklyn. Mike, Marcus said urgently, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking it's time these people learned that some fights aren't worth picking, Mike replied, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of a man who'd made up his mind. And I'm thinking, they just picked the wrong one. Thursday morning found Mike sitting across from Lou Benedetto in the cluttered office of Gleason's gym in Brooklyn. At 68, Lou looked like a character from a Scorsese film, weathered face, sharp eyes, and the kind of street wisdom that came from 50 years in the boxing game. The walls around them were covered with photos of champions he'd trained, including several of Mike during his comeback attempts in the 2000s. So, Lou said, pouring coffee from a pot that had seen better decades, you want to know about underground fighting in Queens? It wasn't a question. I want to know about whoever's running it, Mike replied. And I want to know how to get close to them. Lou studied Mike's face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read fighters' intentions. This about that veteran who got beaten up? It's about a lot more than that now. Mike accepted the coffee, which was strong enough to wake the dead. These people are systematically targeting vulnerable people, veterans, elderly, minorities. They're turning human misery into entertainment for rich sickos. And you think Mike Tyson can just walk in there and shut it down? Lou's tone was skeptical but not dismissive. I think Mike Tyson can get information that the police can't. Mike leaned forward, his voice intense. You still have connections. In that world, Lou. The kind of connections that hear things. Lou was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee and thinking. Finally, he nodded. Vincent Torino. Goes by Vinny. Runs a trucking company out of Long Island City, but his real money comes from gambling and private fights. Tell me about him. 45 years old. Thinks he's the next Tony Soprano. Started small, backroom poker games, sports, betting, but the fight games where he struck gold. Lou pulled out a worn notebook and flipped through pages of contacts and notes. He markets his events as Real American Combat to rich clients who pay 10 grand or more to watch what they think are authentic street fights. But they're not authentic. Hell no. Vinny's got a stable of professional fighters who pose as angry civilians. The marks think they're settling personal disputes, but they're really just getting fed to sharks while rich assholes bet on how long they'll last. Mike felt his anger building, but he kept his voice level. How does he recruit the victims? Network of scouts who identify targets and set them up. Gym bullies, workplace harassers, street punks. They create the conflicts, then offer the victims a chance to settle it like men in private fights. Lou's expression was disgusted. Most people refuse, but some are desperate enough or angry enough to take the bait. What about security? Legal protection? Vinny's connected. His legitimate trucking business gives him cover, and he's got lawyers who make problems disappear. Plus, his main enforcer is a serious piece of work. Tommy Romano, former amateur boxer who never went pro. Now he's 280 of steroid-enhanced muscle with a mean streak a mile wide. Mike absorbed this information, his mind already working through possibilities. If someone wanted to get close to this operation, how would they do it? Lou's eyes sharpened with understanding. You're thinking about going undercover. I'm thinking about gathering evidence that'll put these people away for good. Mike, that's not your job. You're not a cop. You're not FBI. You're a retired heavyweight champion who should be enjoying his golden years. My golden years will be a lot more enjoyable knowing these predators aren't hunting people like Marcus. Mike met Lou's gaze steadily. I need your help, Lou. Not to fight, to think. How do I get inside? Lou was quiet for another long moment, then sighed deeply. Word travels fast in the boxing community. If a certain former heavyweight champion was looking for opportunities to make some money fighting again, desperate enough to consider less than legitimate venues, he trailed off meaningfully. Where would word like that travel? Mulligan's Bar in Astoria. Thursday nights. It's full of former fighters, trainers, promoters, both legitimate and otherwise. Tommy Romano's known to recruit there. Lou's expression was grim. But Mike, these people aren't going to just invite you to their private parties. They'll want to test you first, make sure you're really desperate and not some kind of setup. So I convinced them I'm desperate. You convinced them you're washed up, broke, and willing to do anything for money and relevance. Lou leaned back in his chair, studying Mike carefully. The question is, can you play that role convincingly enough to fool professionals who've been running cons for years? Mike's smile was cold and determined. Lou, I've been preparing for this role my whole life. Every comeback attempt, every moment of doubt, every time someone wrote me off, that's all research for playing a desperate has-been. And once you're in, these people aren't going to just confess their crimes because Iron Mike asks nicely. Once I'm in, I gather evidence, document everything, build a case that'll stick. Mike stood, his decision made. The police can't get close enough to these people. But a washed-up former champion looking for one last payday? That's exactly the kind of mark they're looking for. Lou shook his head but reached for his phone. I must be getting old because I'm actually going to help you with this insane plan. Give me an hour to make some calls. By tonight, half of Queens will know that Mike Tyson's looking for fighting opportunities and isn't too picky about where they come from. As Mike left Gleason's gym, he felt the familiar pre-fight excitement building in his chest. This wasn't about money or glory or proving anything to critics. This was about justice, pure and simple. It was time to go hunting. Mulligan's Bar in Astoria looked exactly like what it was, a working-class Irish pub where former fighters and fight fans gathered to relive past glories and drown current disappointments. The walls were covered with boxing memorabilia, faded photos of local heroes, and newspaper clippings yellow with age. Mike pushed through the heavy wooden door at 7:30 Friday evening, dressed in worn jeans and a simple black jacket that had seen better days. The conversations didn't stop when he entered, but they shifted in tone. Heads turned, recognition flickered in weathered faces, but the reaction was more curious than reverential. This wasn't Madison Square Garden. This was a neighborhood bar where legends were just regular guys with stories to tell and bills to pay. Mike approached the bar, where Danny O'Brien, a former middleweight with cauliflower ears and knowing eyes, was polishing glasses. What'll it be? Danny asked, his Irish accent still thick after 30 years in Queens. Beer. Whatever's on tap. Mike settled onto a bar stool and pulled out a 20, making sure Danny could see it was one of only a few bills in his wallet. Mike. Tyson, Danny said, drawing the beer with practiced efficiency. Haven't seen you around here before. Haven't been around here before. But times change, you know. Mike accepted the beer and took a long pull, letting some genuine weariness show in his expression. Not many opportunities for guys like us anymore. Danny nodded sympathetically. Tell me about it. Used to be a fighter could make a decent living. On the small circuit. Now everything's corporate, everything's politics. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Heard you might be looking for some action. Mike's heart rate increased slightly, but he kept his expression casual. Depends what kind of action we're talking about. I'm not picky anymore. Can't afford to be. Private events, Danny said carefully. Wealthy collectors who appreciate authentic boxing experiences. Good money for the right kind of fighter. How good? 10, 20,000 for one night's work. Sometimes more, depending on the event and the opponent. Mike let his eyebrows rise with genuine surprise. That's serious money. What's the catch? No catch. Just private entertainment for people who can afford to pay for exclusivity. Danny glanced around the bar, then back to Mike. But it's invitation only. You'd need someone to vouch for you. Before Mike could respond, the bar's atmosphere shifted. Conversations quieted as a massive figure filled the doorway. 6'4", 280, wearing an expensive tracksuit that couldn't disguise the violence in his movements. Tommy Romano had arrived. Tommy surveyed the bar like a predator checking his territory, his small eyes cataloging faces and potential threats. When his gaze landed on Mike, recognition was immediate and electric. Holy shit, Tommy said loudly enough for half the bar to hear. Iron Mike Tyson. He approached with the confident swagger of someone who'd never learned to fear consequences. Tommy Romano. Big fan. Mike turned on his bar stool, offering his hand. Tommy, good to meet you. Tommy's handshake was designed to impress. Too long, too firm, establishing dominance through primitive physical contact. Mike endured it with the patient expression of someone who'd dealt with countless such challenges over the years. Buy you a drink, champ? Tommy asked, already signaling Danny for 2 whiskeys. Sure. Mike accepted the drink and gestured to an empty table in the corner. You look like a man who knows things. They settled at the table, and Tommy leaned forward, with the conspiratorial air of someone sharing important secrets. I hear you might be interested in some private work. Depends on what kind of work and what kind of money, Mike replied. I'm not looking for charity, but I'm not looking for trouble either. No trouble, Tommy assured him, his voice smooth with practiced salesmanship. Just exhibition matches for private collectors. Wealthy boxing fans who want exclusive experiences, you know? The kind of people who can afford to pay top dollar to see legends in action. Mike let his desperation show slightly, leaning forward. With interest. What kind of matches? Against who? Carefully selected opponents. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that would damage your reputation. Tommy's smile was all teeth and no warmth. My business associates appreciate authentic boxing history. They'd pay handsomely for the chance to see Iron Mike Tyson in a private setting. How handsomely? 50,000 for one night. Winner takes an extra 25. Tommy watched Mike's reaction carefully. But like I said, it's invitation only. You'd need to be vouched for by someone who understands the discretion required. Mike nodded slowly, as if weighing the offer seriously. What would I need to do to get an invitation? Tommy finished his whiskey and stood. Let me talk to my people. But first, I need to know you're serious about this. Not just talking, but really committed to making some money. I'm serious, Mike said quietly. More serious than I've been about anything in years. Tommy reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Plain white with just a phone number. Call me tomorrow evening. We'll set up a meeting with the right people. As Tommy left the bar, Mike felt the familiar pre-fight tension building in his chest. The hook was set. Now came the dangerous part, convincing professional criminals that Iron Mike Tyson was desperate enough to fight in their blood sport for money. Danny approached the table as Mike finished his beer. You sure you know what you're getting into? The bartender asked quietly. Mike met his eyes with steady certainty. I know exactly what I'm getting into. The question was whether he'd be able to get back out alive. Saturday evening, 8 o'clock. Mike followed Tommy Romano's directions to a converted warehouse in Long Island City, his Honda Accord looking shabby among the luxury cars that lined the industrial street. Mercedes, BMWs, even a Bentley, the kind of vehicles that cost more than most people made in a year. Two large men in expensive suits flanked the side entrance, checking names against a guest list with the efficiency of seasoned professionals. Mike approached with the nervous energy of someone who wasn't sure he belonged, but was too desperate to turn back. Mike Tyson, he told the larger of the 2 guards, a black man with scars on his knuckles that spoke to serious fighting experience. The guard consulted his list, found Mike's name, and stepped aside. Welcome to the show, Mr. Tyson. Mr. Romano's waiting for you inside. The warehouse had been transformed into something between a fight venue and a private club. Professional lighting cast dramatic shadows across a boxing ring in the center of the space, surrounded by VIP seating areas with leather chairs and cocktail tables. A full bar dominated one wall, staffed by attractive servers in black uniforms. Catered food stations offered expensive appetizers to the 150 wealthy spectators who mingled with champagne glasses and predatory smiles. Mike had seen rich people before. He'd made many of them richer during his career, but this crowd was different. These weren't boxing fans celebrating athletic achievement. These were people who got excited by human suffering, who found entertainment in the systematic destruction of hope. Tommy appeared at Mike's elbow, resplendent in an Italian suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Impressive setup, right? Wait until you see the talent we've got lined up tonight. What kind of talent? Mike asked, accepting a drink from a passing server. Real people with real grievances, Tommy said with obvious pride. None of that fake, professional wrestling bullshit. These are authentic conflicts being settled the old-fashioned way. The first fight was already being announced over a professional sound system. Mike watched in growing horror as a 58-year-old postal worker named Eddie Kowalski entered the ring, his movements tentative and uncertain. His opponent was introduced as an angry customer who had a dispute about damaged mail. But Mike could see immediately that the younger man moved with the fluid grace of a trained fighter. Eddie thinks this is about a real mail dispute. Mike asked quietly. Eddie thinks a lot of things, Tommy replied with casual cruelty. The important thing is, he agreed to settle it in the ring instead of going to the postal inspectors. Everyone wins. Everyone except Eddie, Mike thought as the one-sided beating began. The postal worker had heart but no training, throwing wild punches that missed by feet, while his opponent systematically destroyed him with surgical precision. The wealthy crowd cheered each landed blow, many filming with expensive cameras as if they were watching a sporting event instead of a mugging. Eddie lasted 2 rounds before collapsing, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. Medical personnel appeared immediately, not to help him, but to drag him from the ring so the show could continue. The second fight featured Maria Santos, a 35-year-old single mother who'd been told she was facing a neighbor who'd been harassing her children. The neighbor turned out to be a female MMA fighter with 20 pounds of muscle and 10 years of training on Maria. The crowd's excitement reached fever pitch as Maria was systematically dismantled, her desperate attempts to protect herself only prolonging the inevitable. Mike felt his hands clench into fists, his legendary self-control stretched to the breaking point. These weren't fights. They were executions disguised as entertainment. The victims believed they were standing up for themselves, settling legitimate grievances, when they were really just feeding a machine designed to profit from human misery. Incredible, right? Tommy said, misreading Mike's expression. Wait until you see tonight's main event. Between fights, Tommy led Mike through the crowd, introducing him to the kind of people Mike had spent his later years trying to avoid. Real estate developers who bragged about evicting elderly tenants. Hedge fund managers who laughed about destroying pension funds. Politicians whose campaigns were funded by human trafficking. Mike Tyson, a short, well-dressed man, approached with outstretched arms and a smile that never reached his eyes. Vincent Torino. Huge fan, absolute huge fan. Vinny was smaller than Mike had expected, maybe 5'8", but he carried himself with the arrogant authority of someone who'd never faced consequences for his actions. His expensive suit was tailored perfectly, his gold jewelry was understated but valuable, and his handshake lingered just long enough to establish that he considered Mike his equal. Mr. Torino, Mike replied, letting some of his legendary intensity show through. Tommy tells me you appreciate authentic boxing. Authentic everything, Vinny said proudly. Real people, real conflicts, real consequences. No scripts, no predetermined outcomes. Just pure human drama at its finest. The evening's final fight was being announced. A homeless veteran against 2 younger men who'd supposedly stolen his belongings. Mike watched the old soldier enter the ring with military bearing despite his circumstances and felt something break inside his chest. What do you think? Vinny asked, following Mike's gaze. Ready to be part of something special? Mike turned to face the crime boss, his decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. I think I'm ready for anything you can throw at me. Vinny's smile was all predator, no warmth. Excellent. Tommy will be in touch about your first match. Welcome to the future of entertainment, Mr. Tyson. As the homeless veteran was beaten unconscious by opponents half his age, Mike realized he'd crossed a line from which there might be no return. But somewhere in a hospital bed, Marcus Williams was recovering from a beating designed to send a message about the consequences of standing up to predators. Message received. Time to send one back. Flushing Meadows Park on a Sunday morning felt like a sanctuary from the violence Mike had witnessed the night before. He sat on a bench near the Unisphere, watching early joggers circle the paths while trying to process what he'd seen at Vinny's warehouse. The brutality, the systematic exploitation, the wealthy spectators cheering human misery. It all felt like a fever dream in the clean morning light. Detective Janet Morales approached at exactly 10 o'clock, carrying 2 cups of coffee and the grim expression of someone who'd spent sleepless nights building a case against monsters. She was smaller than Mike had expected from her voice, but she carried herself with the confident authority of a cop who'd earned respect through 15 years of solid police work. Mr. Tyson, she said, settling beside him on the bench. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Call me Mike. And thank you for the coffee. He accepted the cup gratefully, needing the caffeine after a night of restless sleep filled with images of Eddie Kowalski's broken face and Maria Santos's desperate attempts to protect herself. Janet pulled out a thick manila folder and set it. Between them, 17 victims over the past year. Most too intimidated or ashamed to press charges. The few who tried to sue faced teams of expensive lawyers and threats that made them drop their cases. Mike flipped through the files, each one a story of systematic predation. Construction workers, teachers, veterans, single mothers, all targeted for their vulnerabilities, all fed into Vinny's machine for the entertainment of people who could afford to pay for human suffering. Vinny's got connections, Janet continued. His trucking business gives him legitimate cover, and he's got lawyers on retainer who make problems disappear. We need evidence that'll stick in federal court, something so clear and comprehensive that money can't make it go away. What kind of evidence? Recordings of Vinny admitting to the fraud and violence. Financial records showing the money trail. Names of clients and their payments. Janet reached into her jacket and pulled out a device smaller than a USB drive. This records everything within a 50-foot radius, stores it on encrypted memory. The FBI uses them for deep cover operations. Mike studied the tiny device, understanding the weight of what she was asking. You want me to wear this into a room full of professional criminals? I want you to document everything so we can put these people away forever. Janet's voice was steady, but Mike could hear the personal stakes underneath. Marcus isn't just my cousin. He practically raised me after my father died. This case is about more than law enforcement for me. Mike's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was familiar, Tommy Romano. Mr. Tyson. Tommy's voice was smooth with satisfaction. Hope you enjoyed last night's show. My associates were very impressed with your appreciation for authentic competition. It was eye-opening. Mike replied carefully, aware of Janet listening intently. Good. We'd like to set up a preliminary event for you. Next Saturday night, test run against a carefully selected opponent. Nothing too challenging. Just want to gauge your current abilities. Tommy's tone suggested this wasn't really a request. What kind of opponent? Someone appropriate for a legend making his return to competition. Nothing you can't handle, but entertaining enough for our clients. The implied threat was clear, refuse, and there would be consequences. I'm interested, Mike said, meeting Janet's eyes. What do I need to know? Same venue as last night. 9 o'clock. Bring your A game. Our clients are paying premium prices to see Iron Mike Tyson in action. After ending the call, Mike turned to Janet with grim determination. That's my way deeper into the organization. Next Saturday, I'll be fighting in there. Ring with their rules. Janet handed him a card with her personal number. Check in with me every 24 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume you're in trouble and move to extract you. As they parted ways, Janet paused. My cousin thinks you're a hero, but heroes get killed when they don't have backup. Mike's smile was cold and determined. Good. Thing I've always been better at surviving than being heroic. Walking back to his car, Mike felt the familiar pre-fight energy building in his chest. This wasn't about prize money or championship belts or proving anything to critics. This was about justice for people like Marcus, like Eddie Kowalski, like all the victims whose files Janet carried. Time to start serious training for the most important fight of his life. The converted warehouse buzzed with electricity that had nothing to do with the professional lighting system. Word had spread through Vinny's network that Iron Mike Tyson would be fighting tonight, and the crowd had swelled to nearly 200 wealthy spectators, all eager to witness either a legend's return or his humiliation. Mike arrived at 9, sharp, wearing simple black trunks and a faded gray t-shirt, his movements deliberately uncertain as he made his way through the excited crowd. Vinny played master of ceremonies with theatrical flair, his voice booming over the sound system as he introduced a living legend who needs no introduction, Iron Mike Tyson. The crowd erupted in appreciation, their champagne glasses catching the spotlight as they raised them in salute to upcoming violence. And in the opposite corner, Vinny continued with obvious relish, the current champion of our organization, the man who's never been beaten in this ring, Tommy the Tank Romano. Tommy entered to even louder cheers, flexing his massive frame for the cameras that were recording everything for Vinny's private clients around the world. At 280 pounds of muscle and steroid enhancement, he looked like a man-eating machine. He shadowboxed for the crowd, his movements fluid and powerful, clearly the betting favorite. In his makeshift corner, Mike fumbled with his mouthpiece, while Lou Benedetto worked on his gloves with obvious concern. To anyone watching, the former champion looked slow, uncertain, maybe even scared. The betting boards shifted in Tommy's favor as spectators sensed weakness in the legend. "Nothing personal, old man," Tommy whispered as they met in the center for instructions. "But I've got a reputation to maintain." "We all do," Mike replied quietly, his eyes already calculating angles and timing. The opening bell sent Tommy charging forward like a freight train, throwing heavy punches designed to end the fight quickly and brutally. Mike seemed to struggle with his footwork, backing up awkwardly while throwing defensive jabs that barely kept his opponent at bay. The crowd's excitement built as Tommy landed several light shots, each one drawing cheers from spectators who smelled blood in the water. For 45 seconds, Mike played the part of a faded champion trying to survive on muscle memory and fading reflexes. Then, halfway through the first round, everything changed. Tommy telegraphed a huge right hand, putting all his weight behind a punch that would have ended most fighters. Mike slipped it by inches, stepped inside Tommy's guard, and unleashed a left hook to the body that sounded like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. The crowd's cheers died in their throats as Tommy doubled over, his face going pale with shock and pain. The transformation was instant and terrifying. Mike's movements became fluid, precise, deadly. His footwork shifted from awkward shuffling to the peekaboo style that had made him famous. Head moving constantly, hands positioned perfectly, closing distance with mathematical precision. Tommy tried to recover, but Mike was already inside his head and inside his guard. A right uppercut snapped Tommy's head back, followed immediately by another left hook that dropped the bigger man's arms. The systematic destruction had begun. "Jesus Christ," someone in the crowd whispered, and suddenly everyone remembered why. Mike Tyson had once been the most feared man in boxing. Round 2 was a masterclass in controlled violence. Mike worked Tommy's body with surgical precision, each punch targeted to specific nerve clusters and pressure points. Tommy's size advantage meant nothing when he couldn't breathe properly, couldn't protect himself, couldn't do anything but survive and hope for mercy. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their champion was methodically dismantled by a 57-year-old man who supposedly belonged in retirement. Some spectators were filming, others were frantically adjusting their bets, but most were simply watching in awe as greatness reasserted itself. In the third round, Mike ended it with the combination that had made him legendary. A left hook to Tommy's liver folded the big man in half, and the following uppercut lifted him completely off his feet before dropping him unconscious to the canvas. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Vinny was on his feet, his eyes bright with dollar signs and possibility. Medical personnel rushed to tend to Tommy, but Mike was already walking back to his corner, his breathing barely elevated. "Magnificent," Vinny shouted over the crowd noise, approaching Mike with outstretched arms. "Absolutely magnificent. Welcome to the organization, Mr. Tyson." I think we're going to make beautiful music together." As they shook hands, Mike activated the recording device hidden in his waistband. The real work was just beginning. Monday morning found Mike sitting behind a desk in Vinny Torino's trucking company, a converted office space that smelled of diesel fuel and easy money. His official title was Special Events Coordinator, but the computer, phone, and filing cabinet access made it clear he was being brought into the inner circle of the operation. "Beautiful setup you got here," Mike said to Vinny, who was showing him around the legitimate front business with obvious pride. 20 years building this company," Vinny replied, gesturing toward the garage where trucks were being loaded for cross-country runs. "But the real money, the serious money, comes from giving wealthy people what they can't get anywhere else: authentic human drama." Over the following week, Mike systematically documented everything he could access. Victim recruitment patterns showed a sophisticated operation targeting specific demographics through social media monitoring and street-level intelligence. Fight schedules revealed events in Philadelphia and Boston, confirming Janet's suspicions. About interstate operations, financial records showed millions flowing through shell companies and offshore accounts. The names of wealthy clients read like a who's who of American power: senators, judges, Fortune 500 CEOs, media moguls, all paying premium prices to watch human suffering served up as entertainment, all trusting Vinny to keep their participation secret. But on Wednesday, Mike intercepted Brad's crew targeting Frank Kowalski, the 73-year-old Korean War veteran, who'd been coming to Riverside Gym for morning workouts. "What's the plan with the old soldier?" Mike asked Brad, who was lounging in the office after reporting his recruitment progress. "Classic setup," Brad replied with casual cruelty. "Kyle's gonna bump into him in the parking lot, spill some coffee, make it look like the old man's fault. Then we escalate from there until he agrees to settle it in the ring." "Cancel it," Mike said flatly. Brad's confidence wavered. "What? Why?" "Because I say so. Vinny wants higher quality opponents, not geriatric patients. Find someone who'll put up more of a fight." Mike leaned back in his chair, letting his reputation do the intimidating. "Unless you want to explain to Vinny why you're wasting his time on targets that won't draw betting interest." Later that evening, Mike called Frank anonymously and suggested he might want to try a different gym for a while. The old soldier's grateful thanks reminded Mike why he was risking his life in this charade. Mike passed information to Detective Janet through coded text messages, each one carefully worded to avoid suspicion if intercepted. She confirmed that federal authorities were building parallel cases based on his intelligence, but warned that the timeline was accelerating beyond their control. Thursday brought news that made Mike's blood run cold. Vinny called him into the private office overlooking the warehouse, his expression bright with anticipation. Saturday night, Vinny announced, pouring expensive whiskey despite the early hour. "The big one. Championship of the people, 500 of my wealthiest clients, 50,000 each. 25 million in revenue for one night's entertainment." "What's the main event?" Mike asked, though he suspected he already knew. "You, my friend. 3 fights, 3 different opponents, progressively tougher challenges." Vinny's smile was all predator. "But here's the beautiful part. Your opponents have personal history with you. Remember those 3 gym bullies you humiliated? They've been training hard, and they're very motivated for revenge." Mike felt the walls closing in, but kept his expression neutral. "Sounds like it'll be memorable. Unforgettable," Vinny agreed. "In fact, I'm marketing it as Iron Mike's Last Stand. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Friday afternoon, Vinny's demeanor shifted from friendly to something much more dangerous. He called Mike into his office with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, and Mike realized with growing dread that the game was about to change completely. "Before we finalize tomorrow night's arrangements," Vinny said, settling behind his desk like a judge pronouncing sentence, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about why you're really here." The recording device in Mike's pocket suddenly felt as heavy as a death sentence. Vinny's office felt smaller than usual as Mike settled into the chair across from the crime boss's desk. The expensive whiskey sat untouched between them, while Vinny savored the moment with the patience of a cat playing with wounded prey. "You know what I love about this business?" Vinny asked, his voice conversational despite the menace underneath. "It's all about reading people, understanding their motivations, their weaknesses, their tells." He leaned forward slightly. And you, Mr. Tyson, have been telling me quite a story. Mike kept his expression neutral, but his hands rested carefully on his thighs, ready to move, if necessary. What kind of story? The story of a washed-up fighter so desperate for money and relevance that he'd compromise his legendary reputation for a payday. Vinny's smile was cold and knowing. Except that's not who you are, is it? Iron Mike Tyson doesn't need $50,000. And he sure as hell doesn't need validation from people like me. The pretense was crumbling, but Mike made one last attempt to maintain his cover. Times change, Vinny. Expenses add up. Pride doesn't pay the bills. Pride. Vinny laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You want to know what's prideful? Brad Kowalski calling me 30 seconds after you humiliated him at that gym, telling me that Iron Mike Tyson just made him apologize to a crippled veteran. Vinny stood and walked to the window overlooking the warehouse floor. That's when I knew we had something special. Mike's stomach dropped, but he forced himself to remain still. Special how? The greatest underground fighting spectacle in history, Mike Tyson's actual last stand. Not some exhibition match or comeback fight, but watching a legend die in the ring. Vinny turned back to face Mike, his eyes bright with avarice. Do you have any idea what people will pay to witness that? I've already sold 500 tickets. At $50,000 each. $25 million to watch Iron Mike Tyson's final moments. And if I refuse to play your game? Vinny opened his desk drawer and pulled out several photographs, spreading them across the polished surface like a poker hand. Mike's blood went cold as he recognized Marcus Williams bound and blindfolded in what looked like a warehouse basement. Marcus was released from the hospital yesterday, Vinny said with casual cruelty. But he never made it home from school. Shame about that. Such a dedicated teacher, so beloved by his students. He paused to let the implications sink in. He's safe for now, but that could change quickly if tomorrow night doesn't go exactly as planned. Mike stared at the photos, his legendary self-control stretched to the breaking point. Marcus looked conscious but frightened, his military bearing intact, even in captivity. What exactly are you planning? 3 fights, as discussed. First, Brad Kowalski. He's been training hard for 6 months, motivated by humiliation and the promise of revenge. Second, Kyle Murphy with weapons, pipes, chains, whatever seems sporting. Third, Derek Castellano with backup fighters, making it 3 against 1 for the finale. And Marcus survives if you complete all 3 fights, regardless of outcome. Dies if you refuse, if you try to escape, or if any law enforcement shows up. Vinny's voice was matter of fact, discussing murder like a business transaction. The beauty of it is, win or lose, my clients get their money's worth. If you triumph, they've seen a legend prove he's still dangerous. If you die, they've witnessed history. Vinny reached across the desk and picked up Mike's recording device, placing it between them with theatrical flourish. Found this during our security sweep yesterday. FBI-grade equipment. Very impressive. Detective Morales is quite resourceful, though not as clever as she thinks. Mike's mind raced through possibilities, all of them bad. His cover was blown, Marcus was a hostage, and federal authorities couldn't move without getting an innocent man killed. The venue. Converted airplane hangar in New Jersey. Completely private, no neighbors, soundproof. Perfect for intimate entertainment. Vinny consulted his watch with professional satisfaction. 18 hours from now, you'll enter that ring. For the last time. The only question is whether you leave it alive. And if I win all 3 fights, then you and Marcus walk away, and I'm out nothing but 3 disposable employees. But honestly, Vinny's smile was genuinely amused. A 57-year-old man against 3 young, motivated opponents with weapons and numerical advantage? The smart money's on you not surviving the second fight. As Mike stood to leave, he felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. Fight and probably die, or refuse and guarantee Marcus's death. Either way, Vinny W.O.N.I. in the parking lot. Mike sent what appeared to be a casual text to Lou. Training session tomorrow night. Bring the old gloves. Lou would understand the coded distress signal and know that Mike was in serious trouble. Driving home through Queens traffic, Mike realized he was facing the most important fights of his life. Not for money, not for glory, not for championships, but for the life of a good man who'd done nothing but stand up to bullies 24 hours to prepare for what might be his final battle. The irony wasn't lost on him. Iron Mike Tyson's last stand might actually be his last stand at Mike's Queens. Apartment felt smaller than usual as he sat at his kitchen table Saturday morning, staring at his phone like it held the answers to impossible questions. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on him. 3 fights against motivated opponents, Marcus's life hanging in the balance, and no backup plan that didn't end with someone innocent dying. That he picked up the phone, typed a message to Detective Janet, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally, he settled on words that would have to be enough. Going dark. If you don't hear from me by Monday, check the warehouses in Jersey. He hit send, then immediately turned off the phone, knowing he couldn't risk Vinny discovering police involvement. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Mike spent the day preparing like he had for championship fights, but with the added weight of knowing this might be his last. Light shadowboxing to keep loose, stretching to maintain flexibility, meditation to center his mind. But mostly, he found himself sitting at his small desk, writing letters to his children that he hoped they'd never have to read. Milan, he wrote. In careful handwriting, by the time you read this, you'll know I made a choice to help someone who couldn't help himself. I hope you understand that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible. At 2 o'clock, Lou Benedetto knocked on the door. The old trainer took one look at Mike's face and set down his gym bag with the grim efficiency of someone who'd seen fighters prepare for their last battles before. How bad is it? Lou asked without preamble. Bad enough that I can't tell you the details, Mike replied. What I need is a corner man for the most important fight of my life. No questions asked. Lou studied Mike's expression, reading the subtext written in the lines around his eyes. 3 fights. How'd you know? Because that's the only scenario that would have you writing letters to your kids. Lou opened his bag and pulled out equipment Mike hadn't seen in years. Special gloves with extra padding over the knuckles, smelling salts in small glass vials, hand wraps designed for extended combat. What's the format? Back to back to back. 60 seconds between fights. Progressively tougher opponents. Mike accepted the gloves, testing their weight and balance. I need to be smart about energy conservation. Lou nodded, his strategic mind already working. Body shots early. Weaken all 3 opponents simultaneously. Don't waste energy on knockout attempts until the final fight. He pulled out a small notebook, sketching quick diagrams. Target the solar plexus in Fight 1, liver shots in Fight 2, legs and breathing in Fight 3. They spent an hour going over strategy, but both men knew that plans rarely survive contact with reality. What mattered was mindset, preparation, and the kind of mental toughness that had carried Mike through 30 years of professional violence. As afternoon faded to evening, Mike found himself looking through old photos, Marcus and his family, his own children, images from his championship years when the world had seemed simpler and justice more straightforward. He pulled up YouTube footage of his greatest victories, watching his younger self destroy opponents with surgical precision and devastating power. That fighter was still in there somewhere, waiting to be called upon one last time. At 6 o'clock. They loaded Mike's gear into Lou's car and drove toward New Jersey. The converted airplane hangar was impossible to miss. Luxury vehicles lined the industrial road for blocks, their owners filing through multiple security checkpoints like attendees at an exclusive premiere. The hangar itself was massive, easily capable of holding 500 spectators in the kind of comfort that money could buy. Professional lighting rigs hung from the ceiling, multiple camera crews set up for broadcast to private viewing rooms around the world. This wasn't some back-alley fight. This was a production that as they approached the fighter's entrance, Mike saw a sign that made his blood run cold. Iron Mike's Last Stand, the final chapter. The implications were crystal clear. Vinny wasn't just expecting Mike to lose. He was marketing his death as the evening's climax. Mike stopped walking, overcome by the weight of what he was about to face. Lou put a hand on his shoulder, and they stood together in the gathering darkness, 2 old fighters preparing for one last war. Lou, Mike said quietly, whatever happens, in there, promise me you'll make sure Marcus gets home safe. Lou nodded grimly, understanding that some promises were more important than survival. You just focus on fighting, Mike. I'll handle everything else. Together, they walked into the arena where legends either died or were reborn. Inside the hangar, the scale of Vinny's operation became clear. This wasn't the converted warehouse from the previous weekend. This was a professional venue designed specifically for spectacle and profit. Professional lighting cast dramatic shadows across a fighting area 30 feet square, surrounded by steel barriers instead of traditional boxing ring ropes. Multiple entrance gates suggested the possibility of additional fighters entering mid-combat, turning individual contests into chaotic melees. Large screens suspended from the ceiling displayed real-time betting odds and fighter statistics, treating human lives like commodities in a marketplace. Mike estimated 500 spectators, mostly men in $1,000 suits, but including women in designer dresses who filmed everything with expensive cameras. The atmosphere crackled with the kind of electricity that came from watching forbidden entertainment, the thrill of witnessing something that would never appear on legitimate television. Vinny intercepted Mike and Lou as they made their way toward the fighters' preparation area. "Magnificent turnout," he announced, his voice bright with avarice. "$25 million in ticket sales, plus another $10 million in live betting. You're quite the draw, Mr. Tyson." The holding area was a converted storage room where Mike got his first close look at his opponents since the gym confrontation 6 weeks earlier. Brad Kowalski had transformed himself during the intervening weeks, leaner, more muscular, moving with the confidence of someone who'd been training intensively and winning fights. Kyle Murphy appeared nervous but determined, his tall frame coiled with anxious energy. Derek Castellano simply looked eager for violence, his thick hands already wrapped and ready. "The format is beautifully simple," Vinny explained with theatrical flair. 3 consecutive fights, 60 seconds rest between each, last man standing takes the victory. Medical attention is available, but stopping the fights for any reason. He smiled coldly. "Well, let's just say that would be very unfortunate. For your friend Marcus." Brad approached Mike with swagger that seemed genuine rather than performed. "6 months I've been training for this," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. 6 months of thinking about how you humiliated me in front of everyone. Tonight, I get to return the favor." Mike studied each opponent's body language and demeanor, his mind automatically cataloging strengths, weaknesses, and psychological tells. Brad was confident, but trying too hard to prove it. Kyle was nervous, which could make him either dangerous or ineffective. Derek was simply waiting for the violence to begin, the most honest of the three in his intentions. Lou set up Mike's corner with the efficiency of someone who'd worked hundreds of fights. Towels, water bottles, smelling salts, and the special gloves that would need to protect Mike's hands through 3 consecutive battles. "Remember the strategy," Lou said quietly. "Body shots early, conserve energy, use their aggression against them." As 8 o'clock approached, the crowd's energy built to fever pitch. Many spectators were recording with professional equipment, treating this as a historic moment they could monetize later. Mike realized with cold clarity that many of these people were hoping to witness his death, to say they'd been present when Iron Mike Tyson fought his final fight. The house lights dimmed dramatically, spotlights focusing on the fighting area like theater lighting illuminating a stage. Vinny approached with a wireless microphone, his smile predatory in the harsh, artificial light. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed over the sound system, echoing off the hangar's metal walls. "Welcome to the most exclusive sporting event in the world, Iron Mike Tyson's last stand." The crowd erupted in appreciation, their champagne glasses catching the light as they raised them in salute to upcoming violence. Mike stepped forward into the spotlight, feeling the weight of 500 pairs of eyes watching his every movement. Somewhere in a basement prison, Marcus Williams was waiting to learn whether his friend would save his life or die trying. Mike touched the recording device hidden in his waistband one last time, then focused on the only thing that mattered now. Surviving the next hour to Vinny's introduction continued with the practiced showmanship of someone who understood that spectacle was as important as sport. Tonight, you'll witness not just fights, but a reckoning. The legend himself facing the consequences of his interference in business that wasn't his concern. The betting odds flashed across multiple screens. Mike was somehow still favored overall despite facing 3 opponents, testament to his reputation even at 57. But individual fight odds varied dramatically, with Brad given a surprising chance of scoring an upset in the opening contest. Mike stood in his corner, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, finding the rhythm that had carried him through 30 years of professional combat. Across the fighting area, Brad stretched and shadowboxed, his movements designed more for the cameras than for actual preparation. The crowd's energy was intoxicating, a wall of sound and expectation. But Mike blocked it out, focusing on Lou's voice and his own breathing. That a professional ring announcer took the microphone, his voice carrying the theatrical authority of someone who'd worked championship events. Introducing first, from Astoria, New York, weighing 215 pounds, the winner of 6 consecutive underground bouts, Brad the Alpha Kowalski. Brad entered to rock music and crowd cheers, having become something of a local celebrity in Vinny's organization. He played to the audience, flexing and gesturing, his confidence seemingly genuine rather than performed. 6 victories had given him belief in his own invincibility. And introducing the challenger, the announcer continued, his voice dropping to a more respectful tone. Fighting out of Brooklyn, New York, weighing 240 pounds, the former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Iron Mike Tyson. Mike's introduction was more subdued but carried infinitely more weight. This wasn't just another fighter. This was a living piece of boxing history, a man who'd once terrorized the heavyweight division with devastating power and predatory intensity. In the final moments before the bell, Mike made direct eye contact with Brad across the fighting area. The younger man tried to stare him down, but Mike could see through the bravado to the fear underneath. Brad had never faced anyone with Mike's experience, reputation, or ability to project psychological intimidation. The traditional boxing bell signaled the start of the first fight, and the crowd fell silent for one electric moment before erupting as the two men began to circle each other. Brad came out aggressively, throwing wild punches designed more to impress the spectators than to land effectively. His overhand rights and looping left hooks looked powerful but telegraphed every movement. Mike slipped them easily, using head movement and footwork that made 30 years of training look effortless. After 30 seconds of missing badly, Brad's confidence began to waver. The crowd that had been cheering his aggression started to murmur with concern as none of his punches found their target. Mike landed his first clean shot, a short left hook to Brad's liver that didn't look like much to the audience but sent shock waves through the younger man's nervous system. Brad's face went pale with sudden pain, his body involuntarily folding around the impact point. Mike followed immediately with a right cross to Brad's solar plexus, doubling him over and disrupting his breathing. The systematic destruction had begun, each punch calculated for maximum effect with minimum energy expenditure. Using Brad's forward momentum against him, Mike stepped to the side like a matador avoiding a charging bull and delivered the perfect uppercut that had ended countless professional fights. The punch lifted Brad completely off his feet before dropping him unconscious to the canvas, blood trickling from his mouth. The crowd erupted in shocked amazement. Their local hero had been dismantled in under 2 minutes by a man old enough to be his father. Medical personnel rushed to tend to Brad while Mike returned to his corner, his breathing barely elevated. 2 more, Lou said quietly, wiping Mike's face with a cold towel. Mike nodded, already preparing mentally for Kyle while the crowd tried to process what they'd just witnessed. The legend was far from finished as Brad was carried out on a stretcher. The crowd's energy shifted from confident expectation to nervous excitement. The local favorite had been destroyed so easily that many spectators were reconsidering their assumptions about the evening's outcome. Kyle Murphy entered the fighting area carrying a steel pipe, which drew enthusiastic cheers from bloodthirsty spectators who understood that the rules had fundamentally changed. This wasn't boxing anymore. This was survival combat where weapons were not only allowed but encouraged. Vinny's voice boomed over the sound system. For fight number 2, weapons are now authorized to make things more interesting for our distinguished guest. Kyle was tall and rangy with good reach, and his strategy was immediately obvious. Use the pipe to keep Mike at distance while landing shots to his head and body. Turn superior reach into an insurmountable advantage. He swung the pipe in practice motions, showing he'd received some training during the months of preparation. Mike immediately adjusted his approach. Boxing technique alone wouldn't be sufficient against a motivated opponent with a steel weapon. He needed to get inside Kyle's reach, neutralize the pipe, and turn the fight into close-quarters combat where experience mattered more than equipment. Lou shouted advice about footwork and timing, but his voice was nearly drowned out by the crowd's excitement. Many spectators were standing now, their cameras focused on what promised to be the evening's most dramatic confrontation. The fight became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Kyle swung the pipe in wide arcs, forcing Mike to duck and weave constantly, his head movement as precise as it had been during his championship years. The pipe whistled past his head multiple times without connecting, each near miss drawing gasps from the audience. Mike caught Kyle off guard by moving forward instead of away from a pipe swing, demonstrating the kind of counterintuitive thinking that separated great fighters from merely good ones. He grabbed Kyle's wrist with both hands and delivered a devastating knee to his solar plexus, doubling the taller man over while maintaining control of the weapon. They grappled for control of the pipe in a struggle that combined wrestling, leverage, and pure determination. Kyle was younger and taller, but Mike's experience in close-quarters combat gave him crucial advantages in positioning and technique. Mike gradually worked the pipe away from Kyle's grip, using leverage and body positioning to overcome youth and size. When he finally wrenched the weapon free, he tossed it out of the fighting area to enthusiastic boos from spectators who'd been hoping for more weapon-based violence. Now it was hand-to-hand combat, and Kyle tried to use his reach advantage with long, straight punches. But Mike was too experienced, too skilled at closing distance and neutralizing height advantages. He'd faced taller opponents throughout his career and knew exactly how to negate their natural gifts. Mike backed Kyle against the steel barrier and unleashed a classic combination that showcased 30 years of refined technique. Left hook to the body, right uppercut to the chin, followed by another left hook that snapped Kyle's head to the side. The younger man's knees buckled, his coordination disrupted by the systematic assault. Mike finished with a short right cross that put Kyle down for good. The redhead was conscious but clearly finished, his body unable to respond to his brain's commands to continue fighting. Mike was breathing harder now, showing the effects of 2 consecutive battles, but his technique remained sharp and his determination unshaken. As medical personnel helped Kyle from the fighting area, Mike looked toward the entrance where Derek Castellano waited with obvious anticipation. Derek wasn't alone. 2 additional fighters flanked him. Both looked like experienced heavyweights, one black, one Latino, both roughly Mike's age, but in better physical condition. Vinny's voice crackled over the sound system with obvious relish. For our final contest, Derek Castellano will be joined by special guests Crusher Williams and Bulldozer Morales. 3 against 1, no holds barred, last man standing takes the victory. The crowd went absolutely wild, understanding that they were about to witness either Mike Tyson's greatest triumph or his final defeat. The betting odds shifted dramatically in favor of the 3 younger opponents as spectators grasped the mathematical reality of the situation. Mike stood in his corner, sweat dripping down his face, knowing that everything, his life, Marcus's life, justice for countless victims, would be decided in the next few minutes. 3 against 1. No rules, no mercy. Time to find out if legends were made of stronger stuff than ordinary men. Derek Castellano entered the fighting area with his 2 backup fighters like a general leading an assault force. At 26, Derek was the stockiest of the original 3 bullies, but months of intensive training had transformed him into something genuinely dangerous. His companions, Crusher Williams and Bulldozer Morales, moved with the fluid confidence of men who'd spent years fighting for money in venues where rules were suggestions rather than requirements. Mike now faced 3 experienced opponents while already exhausted from 2 previous battles. The crowd sensed this might be the end for the legendary champion, their excitement reaching fever pitch as betting boards showed Mike as a 5-1 underdog despite his previous victories. Use their numbers against them, Lou shouted over the crowd noise, his voice barely audible above the roar. Make them get in each other's way. You've been here before. The advice was sound but easier said than executed. 3 opponents met. 3 sets of hands, 3 different timing patterns, 3 separate strategies to counter simultaneously. Mike would need every ounce of ring generalship, his ability to control distance, positioning, and psychology to survive the next few minutes. All 3 attacked at once, forcing Mike to use the fighting area's geometry to avoid being surrounded. His footwork became a chess game played at lightning speed, each step calculated to maintain escape routes While looking for opportunities to isolate individual opponents, Mike targeted Derek first, knowing he was the emotional leader whose defeat would demoralize the others. Using Derek's own aggression against him, Mike stepped aside from a wild charge and redirected the younger man face first into the steel barrier. Derek went down hard, blood streaming from his broken nose, temporarily removing one threat from the equation. Now facing Crusher and Bulldozer, Mike employed classic boxing strategy, lateral movement, changing angles, making them chase him while he picked his shots. Both men were strong and experienced, but they lacked Mike's ring intelligence and spatial awareness. Something primal awakened in Mike as he faced the two remaining opponents. The controlled violence that had made him the baddest man on the planet reasserted itself. Years of civilization stripped away to reveal the predator underneath. His movements became more fluid, more dangerous, as muscle memory overrode conscious thought. Crusher fell to a perfect left hook to the temple, his legs betraying him as he collapsed in a boneless heap. The crowd gasped. Many had never seen knockout power like this demonstrated live, the devastating impact that had made Mike Tyson legendary. Bulldozer, realizing he was now alone against a man whose reputation was being rewritten in real time, tried to retreat. But Mike's confidence had returned with each victory, his breathing steadied by adrenaline and the familiar rhythm of combat. Mike ended it with his signature combination, a left hook to the body that dropped Bulldozer's guard, followed immediately by a devastating uppercut that lifted the bigger man completely off his feet. Bulldozer crashed down unconscious, his body folding like a marionette with cut strings. Mike stood alone in the fighting area, bloodied but victorious, breathing hard but unbroken. The crowd was on its feet, many in disbelief at what they'd witnessed. 3 consecutive victories against progressively tougher opponents had proven that some legends never fade. But Mike's celebration was premature. From the edge of the fighting area, Vinny Torino approached with a chrome-plated pistol in his hand, his friendly demeanor completely evaporated. "Outstanding performance, Mr. Tyson," Vinny said into his wireless microphone, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hangar. "But I'm afraid we have one more act in tonight's show." Vinny stood at the edge of the fighting area, his .45 automatic reflecting the overhead lighting as he smiled with the satisfaction of a man whose plan was finally reaching its climax. The crowd, still buzzing from Mike's incredible victories, slowly realized that the evening's entertainment was far from over. "You see," Vinny continued, his voice carrying over the suddenly quiet hangar, "the real spectacle was never whether you could win these fights. The real entertainment was always going to be watching Iron Mike Tyson die." Mike remained in fighting stance, but his heart sank as he grasped the full scope of Vinny's betrayal. Every conversation, every negotiation, every promise had been lies designed to bring him to this moment, alone, exhausted, and defenseless against a man with a gun and no conscience. "My clients paid $25 million for exclusive entertainment," Vinny explained with theatrical flair. "They want to witness history, the final moments of a living legend. And I always give my customers what they pay for." The wealthy spectators were split in their reactions. Some shouted encouragement for Vinny to finish Mike off, treating murder like the climax of an action movie. Others seemed shocked by the turn toward actual execution, their thrill-seeking having limits they hadn't expected to reach. "The fights were just foreplay," Vinny continued, moving closer to the fighting area. "The real climax is watching greatness reduced to nothing, proving that money and planning always triumph over reputation and courage." To Mike's horror, 2 guards dragged Marcus Williams into the fighting area. Marcus was bound and gagged but conscious, his eyes wide with understanding of what was about to happen. Vinny positioned himself behind Marcus, gun pressed to his friend's head. "Marcus dies first," Vinny announced with casual cruelty. "You get to watch your friend pay the price for your interference in my business. Then you join him and my clients. Get the exclusive footage they paid for." Mike felt helpless rage building in his chest. After everything, the investigation, the fights, the victories, it was ending with the execution of an innocent man who'd done nothing but stand up to bullies. "Let him go, Vinny. This is between you and me." "No," Vinny replied with obvious satisfaction. "This is about teaching lessons. About consequences. about what happens when legends forget they're mortal. Vinny began a countdown for the crowds. Entertainment, his voice echoing off the hangar walls. 10, 9, 8. The wealthy spectators were filming everything, treating cold-blooded murder as premium content for their private collections. 7, 6, 5. Suddenly, Lou Benedetto appeared behind Vinny like a ghost, moving with surprising stealth. For a 68-year-old man, he struck Vinny in the back of the head with a steel folding chair, the impact sending the crime boss stumbling forward. The gun discharged harmlessly into the air as Vinny fell, the sound echoing like thunder through the hangar. Lou immediately began cutting Marcus's bonds while Mike rushed to help, the crowd erupting in chaos as their exclusive entertainment devolved into actual pandemonium. Security guards moved toward the fighting area, but panicked spectators blocked their path as the reality of the situation finally penetrated their thrill-seeking stupor. Many were trying to delete footage from their phones while others pushed toward exits in desperate attempts to avoid being connected to what they'd witnessed. Vinny recovered quickly, raising his gun toward Mike with murder in his eyes. "You want to be a hero, old man? Heroes die." Mike moved faster than anyone expected, closing the distance between them in 2 powerful strides. As Vinny squeezed the trigger, Mike delivered one perfect punch, a left hook with all his remaining strength and fury behind it. The gun flew from Vinny's hand as he crashed backward into the steel barrier, sliding down unconscious as blood trickled from his mouth. Mike stood over him, breathing hard, as sirens wailed in the distance. Justice, finally, was coming. The sound of sirens grew louder as police vehicles surrounded the converted hangar, their red and blue lights painting the industrial landscape in urgent colors. Detective Janet Morales' voice crackled over a bullhorn outside. "This is the NYPD. The building is surrounded. Everyone on the ground, hands visible." SWAT teams poured through multiple entrances as panicked spectators tried to process the reality that their exclusive entertainment had become a federal crime scene. The wealthy men and women who'd paid $50,000 each to watch human suffering were now face down on concrete floors, their expensive clothes grinding against dirt and oil stains. Mike helped Marcus to his feet, both men shaking with relief and residual adrenaline. Marcus was beaten but conscious, his military bearing intact despite hours of captivity and fear. They embraced briefly, 2 men who'd survived something that should have killed them both. "Are you hurt?" Mike asked, checking Marcus for serious injuries. "Nothing that won't heal," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "But Mike, how did the police know where to find us?" Detective Janet appeared at Mike's elbow, her face grim with professional satisfaction and personal relief. "GPS tracker in the recording device," she explained tersely. "When you went dark, we had federal agents monitoring the signal. Soon as you activated it inside the hangar, we had probable cause for immediate action. Federal agents were already confiscating computers, phones, and recording equipment that documented the entire criminal enterprise. The event had been broadcast live to private clients worldwide, providing evidence of an international network that extended far beyond Vinny's local operation." "The spectators?" Mike asked, watching wealthy Americans being processed like common criminals. "Charges ranging from financing illegal gambling to conspiracy to commit murder," Janet said with obvious satisfaction. "Turns out several of them are prominent politicians and business leaders. This is going to make headlines for months." Vinny regained consciousness as he was being loaded into an ambulance under heavy police guard. He glared at Mike with undiluted hatred but said nothing, understanding that his empire had crumbled in a single night. Federal charges including kidnapping, attempted murder, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise would ensure he spent the rest of his life in prison. Lou approached with ice packs and bottled water, his weathered face showing the strain of the evening's events. "How are you feeling, champ?" "Like I just fought 3 professional fighters in a row," Mike replied with a weak smile. "But alive, which is more than they probably expected." Emergency medical technicians checked both Mike and Marcus for serious injuries, finding nothing that required immediate hospitalization. Mike's hands were swollen and bruised. His ribs ached from the physical demands of 3 consecutive fights, but his injuries were superficial compared to what could have happened as the crime scene was processed and evidence collected. Mike learned the full scope of Vinny's operation. Similar fighting rings had been dismantled simultaneously in Philadelphia and Boston, with dozens of victims identified and offered counseling services. The client list read like a directory of American power and influence, all of whom would face serious federal charges. Marcus, Janet said, approaching with paperwork and genuine concern, you'll need to give a complete statement, but that can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, you're going home. Marcus looked around the hangar where he'd nearly died, where his friend had risked everything to save him. Home sounds perfect. As they prepared to leave, Mike realized something fundamental had changed during the night's ordeal. He'd rediscovered not just his physical capabilities, but his sense of purpose. The anonymous retirement he'd been living felt empty compared to the satisfaction of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Detective Janet handed Mike her card. The FBI will need extensive debriefing over the next few weeks. Your undercover work provided evidence that'll put away dozens of criminals. Just make sure justice sticks this time, Mike replied, watching Vinny's ambulance disappear into the night. People like Marcus deserve to live without fear. As they walked into the cool New Jersey air, Mike felt lighter than he had in years. The legend had faced his greatest challenge and emerged victorious, not because of his fists, but because of his courage to stand up when it mattered most. 6 months later, April sunshine streamed through the expanded windows of what was now called the Riverside Community and Veterans Fitness Center. The modest gym had been completely renovated and enlarged, transformed from Pete Santangelo's struggling business into a thriving community hub that served over 300 members from all walks of life. Mike stood in the main workout area, wearing a polo shirt with the center's new logo, watching the morning sessions with quiet satisfaction. The atmosphere was everything Pete's old gym hadn't been: welcoming, supportive, diverse, and completely free of the toxic behavior that had once driven good people away. The renovation had been funded by Mike's reward money from the federal government for his undercover work that dismantled Vinny's criminal network. But more importantly, it had been designed as a sanctuary where people could pursue fitness and health without fear of harassment or intimidation. Marcus Williams entered, wearing shorts and a Veterans Fitness Program t-shirt, moving with confidence that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. His limp was barely noticeable now, his physical therapy having evolved into serious strength training under Mike's guidance. More importantly, his role as coordinator of the Veterans Program had given him new purpose and renewed faith in community. Morning, champ, Marcus said, approaching the leg press machine where his journey had begun so many months ago. Morning, coach, Mike replied, using Marcus's preferred title from his work with the high school wrestling team and Veterans Support Group. The Veterans Program had grown beyond Mike's wildest expectations. Over 100 former military personnel now used the center regularly, many participating in group therapy sessions that combined physical fitness with emotional healing. Partnerships with local VA hospitals had created a model program that was being replicated across the country. How's Jimmy doing? Mike asked, nodding toward a corner where 16-year-old Jimmy Ramirez was practicing combinations on a heavy bag. Better every day, Marcus replied. The bullying at school stopped completely once word got out that he was training here. Amazing how quickly cowards back down when they know there might be consequences. Jimmy had come to the center 3 months earlier, a nervous kid dealing with harassment from older students. Mike had taken him under his wing, teaching not just boxing technique, but the more important lessons about when to walk away and when to stand up. The transformation had been remarkable. Pete Santangelo approached with the daily schedule. His confidence transformed along with his business. As assistant manager, he'd learned to stand up for the center's values instead of cowering from potential trouble. Mike, we've got the anti-bullying workshop at 3, and Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up story on the Veterans Program. No interviews for me, Mike said firmly. This isn't about celebrity, it's about community. Focus on Marcus and the program participants. The transformation of Pete's attitude had been as dramatic as the physical renovation. The man who'd once hidden behind his desk while members were harassed now actively enforced the center's zero-tolerance policy for disrespectful behavior. More importantly, he'd become a mentor for younger staff members, teaching them that neutrality in the face of injustice enabled evil. Detective Janet Morales stopped by during her lunch break, a habit she developed since the trials ended. Vinny Torino had received 25 years in federal prison, while his entire network faced similar sentences. The three gym bullies had pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and now served their community service at the Veterans Center, learning respect through honest work. "How are the nightmares?" Janet asked Mike quietly, referring to the PTSD symptoms he'd experienced after the warehouse fights. "Better every day," Mike replied honestly. "Turns out the best therapy for surviving violence is helping other people heal from it." As the afternoon progressed, Mike moved between different groups, teaching boxing fundamentals to teenagers, spotting elderly members on weight machines, leading discussions about conflict resolution with veterans who'd seen too much combat. Each interaction reinforced his understanding that true strength came from lifting others up rather than knocking them down. Frank Kowalski, the 73-year-old Korean War veteran, approached with obvious gratitude. "Mike, I wanted to thank you again for that phone call 6 months ago. If you hadn't warned me to stay away from the gym that week." "Ancient history, Frank," Mike replied, though they both knew the old soldier had been targeted for Vinny's operation. "How's the new grandson?" As closing time approached, Mike found himself at the same heavy bag where his journey had begun 6 months earlier. But instead of working out alone in anonymous obscurity, he was surrounded by the sounds of positive encouragement, shared determination, and genuine community. Marcus finished his workout and joined Mike, both men looking around at the thriving center they'd helped create through their willingness to stand up when it mattered. "You know what I've learned?" Marcus said, toweling off after his session. "Real victory isn't about winning fights. It's about creating places where fights aren't necessary." Mike nodded, understanding that they'd accomplished something more valuable than any championship belt or monetary prize. They'd proven that individual courage could make a difference, that bullies could be stopped, and that communities could heal when good people refused to remain silent. Through the center's windows, the afternoon sun illuminated a diverse group of people who'd found strength not just in their muscles, but in their bonds with each other. Mike continued his workout, surrounded by the sound of genuine victory, the sound of people lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. The legend had found his purpose beyond the ring, proving that heroes still walked among us, ready to act when needed. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.